Hello everyone, Pat Farabee here. It's been a very long time since my last video, but something happened this past weekend that, I don't know, I felt compelled to speak out on and talk about a specific aspect of it that either hasn't really been discussed yet, or at least hasn't really been talked about in the level of scrutiny and detail that I think it warrants. Now, for those of you confused, what happened this past weekend is in Calgary, up in Canada at the Comics and Entertainment Expo, there was a group called the Honey Badger Brigade who was expelled from that expo. And their crime was they dared voice an opinion that was contrary to the opinion of panelists that were giving a talk at the expo. This happened even despite the fact that the person, Allison Tiemann, who had stood up from the Honey Badger Brigade to talk about what was being talked about and to voice her opposing opinion, was very eloquent, very calm, very respectful, and even had points of agreement between her and the moderator that she was talking to, and the moderator had points of agreement with her and Allison. And so it was a discussion. But what happened was a fairly small group of people complained, and a lot of those complaints came through social media from people who were not even at the expo or not even in Canada at the time. So that was kind of weird. And so what happened was the people who were running the expo came to the Honey Badgers the next day, told them that they had to collect their booth and leave. And so on the second day of a 4-day expo, where most of the action was going to start to take place, a lot of the guests were starting to arrive. A lot of the patrons who would be going through the expo started to arrive. The Honey Badger folks instead had to suffer humiliation by packing up their booth that they had worked so hard on, which, by the way, was right across from the customer service desk. And so they had this double humiliation of having probably extra traffic there. So they had this walk of shame, in essence, through all of these people who were arriving at the expo. And I think that was wrong. I think that was wrong. But the thing that I want to talk about that really no one has been talking about is the actual discussion that took place at the panel, and specifically the question that was asked that Allison Tiemann responded to, which I don't think has been addressed yet, not fully at least. And so let me set this up. The moderator, I believe her name is Stephanie Chan, and she was asking a question. It was kind of an idle question, kind of almost a rhetorical, it was almost just kind of a, I don't understand this sort of a thing. But she said this. She said, "But that's just it. What had happened? At what point did it all of a sudden, did it become a dirty thing for women to be into this stuff in the eyes of so many of these men's rights activist types?" That was her question. Allison said, "Would you like us to field that? I'm an MRA," and the moderator allowed it. But here's the problem. Allison, if you're listening, you did a wonderful job of explaining the problems with feminism and why men's rights activists have the position in opposition to feminism. But what I think was never really fully answered, although it was briefly touched on, but I don't think what was fully answered was the actual question. At what point did it all of a sudden become a dirty thing for women to be into geek culture in the eyes of so many men's rights activist types? That was the question. And the response that Allison had given started off with, "The reason I don't like feminism is..." Now, the issue I have with that response is that it kind of grants the question. So when you say, "The reason I don't like feminism," in response to why is it all of a sudden a dirty thing for so many women to be into geek culture, it's almost an acceptance of that question, that it is a dirty thing for so many women to be into geek culture. And that's the thing. Now, to understand the question and understand how to answer the question, let's think about geek culture and the history of geek culture. Why do we call it geek culture? Well, it's because, at least in the beginning, it was primarily geeks who were part of this culture. We were all social outcasts. We were the people who, when there was a party, our friends would be having fun, or shall I say our associates, our classmates, the people that we happened to be at the party with, they would be having fun, and we would be sitting in the corner playing our Game Boy, or we would be sitting in the corner reading our comic book, or we would be sitting in the corner reading a science fiction book, or whatever it is. All right, we were not joiners in that cultural event. What made us outcasts is that we weren't part of the interest group that the vast majority of our peers were part of. So our friends would talk about, or again I call them friends, our classmates would talk about the last football game, that touchdown that the quarterback scored. They would talk about who hit the home run in the last baseball game, or who scored the most points in the basketball game. And we weren't really interested in that. We didn't care. And that made us weird because 99% of the people in the building cared, but we didn't. What we cared about was what Batman was going to be up to in the next issue. And that made us weird. That made us outcasts. Now, consequently, because the group of us was so small, because 99% of the people were interested in those other things that we had no interest in, and the number of people that were focused on what we liked were so small, that when you found someone else that was into what you were into, when you found that other person, whoever they were, that when you mentioned your favorite comic, their face lit up just like yours did, well, that was a special moment. That was an absolutely special moment, and in that moment you felt bonded to that person. You felt a kinship to that person because they got you. Now, I want to say that the connection that we feel is not unique to geek culture. It's the same sort of connection that you feel in any other culture. You know, when you go to a bar with your friends and you sit and watch the game and you're all screaming for your quarterback when he throws that winning touchdown, that's a connection, and it's a very strong emotional connection that you have with your close-knit buddies who just get you. It's the same sort of a thing. The main reason that the geek culture connection was so strong, it's because we didn't have a lot of those other groups that we were part of. So we weren't part of the ones that liked sports. We weren't part of the ones that liked this or that or the other. We liked our comic books. We liked our video games. And that was pretty much what we focused on. And so it was that tight-knit group that became very close and very bonded. And here's the thing, very inclusive. And the reason that we were extremely inclusive was because it was so rare to find someone that you could connect to in there. It was such a treat to encounter someone else that was into what you were into. I don't care who you are. I don't care what color you are, what gender you are, what country you live in. We're cool. And that's the culture that is geek culture. And so your question is this. Your question was, at what point did it all of a sudden become a dirty thing for women to be into geek culture? I mean, you said this stuff, but you mean comic books or geek culture in general, I'm assuming. Well, the answer is it isn't. It isn't dirty at all in the eyes of men's rights activists for women or girls to be into geek culture. Let me say that again. It is not dirty at all in the eyes of men's rights activists for women or girls to be into geek culture. In fact, we're thrilled. We're absolutely, positively thrilled that the number of women that are coming into geek culture is on the rise. That excites us. That makes us happy. And it's not because we're horny geeks and was like, oh wow, there's more girls. That's not the reason. It's because we love geek culture, and more women coming in means more people coming in. More people to be passionate about what we're passionate about. And so we openly embrace that. We welcome that with open arms. We are so glad that more women and girls are being interested in comic books. So then that might lead you to say that it's just feminists, that men's rights activists have a problem with coming into the comic culture or the geek culture. But really, it's kind of the same situation. There is no problem with feminists coming into the geek culture. You know, men's rights activists do not agree with many of the tenets of modern neo-radical feminism. But that does not mean feminists would be unwelcome in geek culture. Okay? Let me say that again. men's rights activists do not have a problem with feminists coming into and embracing geek culture. Because the more people who become part of and become passionate about geek culture, the stronger the culture becomes, and that is good for everyone involved. So what is the issue? Well, to understand exactly what the issue is, let me talk about a specific issue of a specific comic. Issue number 93 of a comic called Nightwing, in which the strong male hero, Nightwing, finds himself assaulted by an obsessive admirer. And I won't get too far into the details of that issue, except to say that what happens to Nightwing in that issue is exceptionally traumatic to fans of the series. It's very shocking, it's very traumatic, and it scars the character deeply, and dare I say, it has a similar scarring effect on those who read it. Because you connect to these characters, you connect to these heroes. And to see them put through those horrible things, well, that is very, very scarring and very traumatizing. But it's also part of that connection to the comic. You go through these horrible things with your character, and you experience those with them, and you get through those with your character. Well, why do I bring that up? Because that issue made me very uncomfortable, and I did not like that at all. I did not like what happened in that issue. It made me very uncomfortable, and it wasn't cool in my eyes what happened. But here's the thing. I would never say to a fan of that series that you are not allowed to like Nightwing because what happened in that issue made me uncomfortable. I would never dare to tell the person who wrote that issue that you don't have the right to write that issue and put that character through the trauma that caused me so much distress. Because in the truth, it is the author, it is the artist's world, it is the artist's character, it is the artist's story to tell and to show and display in the manner in which they see that story told. And it is up to us to take what they offer and either embrace it or set it aside and go look at something else. But it is not up to us to tell the author, no, this isn't acceptable. You change this so that it doesn't make me uncomfortable. And that, unfortunately, is what the new crop of feminist fans seem to be wanting to happen. We've already seen it in the Batgirl debacle. We've already seen it in the cry to take one of, in my opinion, the absolute best comic covers in the history of comics and say that, no, you can't do that because it makes us uncomfortable. Now, it's one of the best covers in the history of comics for a lot of reasons, and I won't get into all that, but here's why it was inappropriate to ask that that cover be changed. And this argument may surprise you. It's not going to include anything about canon. It's not going to include anything about the historical nature of the cover. It's just that that's what the artist wanted to put on the cover. That is the reason why that should have been the cover, is because that is the artist's work. It's not your work. It's not my work. That belongs to the artist. And they have presented that for our consumption. And if you don't want to consume it, then that is your decision. If you don't want to read it, that is your decision. There's plenty of other things available for you to look at. And just like I would not tell you that a comic book that is geared towards things that you like, that I don't like, is not appropriate and must be changed to make it so that I'm not uncomfortable, I would expect the same courtesy from you. I would expect the same courtesy that you not say that it is important for us to change the way that artists dress the characters that they've created in a world of their own doing simply because it makes some people who look at it feel icky. I mean, that makes everything kind of weird when you go to that point and you say, well, I don't like that, therefore change it. That's not really comic-y. That's not really geeky culture. That's not really, you're kind of crossing the line there, and it makes us uncomfortable. But you know what really does it? What really does it is when the accusations come that because people like a certain type of comic, that there's something wrong with them and that they should somehow be excluded from the culture. Because what happens in that moment? Think about it. Think about the origins of geek culture and what your actions, and again, I'm not talking to you now, Stephanie Chan, because I don't think you did this, but I'm talking about the actions of these neo-rad feminists who have come in and said, okay, I like this and this, but that has to go, right? They've come in and they've put their easy chair out and they've stretched their legs out, which is great. Hey, the more the merrier. But now they're pointing at the things on the wall and saying, that's cool, that's cool. No, that is not acceptable. Get that out of my sight. Well, what you're doing in that essence is you are now becoming that bully, jock, asshole that used to take the comic from us and say, what is this stupid shit? What kind of a dumbass would read this crap and tears it up and throws it in the garbage and then stuffs us in the locker? That's what we came to our geek culture to avoid in the first place. And now it has been brought to us through this persecution of comics that we like. We like comics that you don't like. That's fine. You like comics that we don't like. That's fine. You know, I'm not into a lot of the stuff that you might like. I'm not going to say that the person who writes it must change it so that I like it, or that you are somehow lesser of a geek or somehow wrong or evil for liking what you like that I don't. So all I would ask is that you offer that same consideration. That same consideration that, hey, you don't like the comic that I like, but you know what? That's okay. It's okay that you don't like what I like. Just don't read it. That's pretty simple. Don't read it. And if there's something else that you want to see, drive the creation of it. But there's a huge difference between saying, I think there should be more strong female characters of this type drawn in this way in comics, and on the flip side, demanding that existing characters and existing worlds be modified to fit what you think they should be. I don't like this female character. I think she needs to be stronger in these ways and dressed this particular way so that she can become the hero that I want to see. Well, no. The first is cool. The more kinds of comics there are, the better. I'm sure there's comics you could come up with that would fit the bill of what you like, what you're looking for. And maybe you're not even the one that makes it. Maybe you just, get that idea out there and people latch onto it and run with it. But to say in the same breath that no, what you have, you can't have because it offends me. You need to change what you have and make it more like what I want. Now you are no better at all than that jock who would take our Game Boy from us or take our comic from us, throw it in the trash can and stuff us in that locker and traumatize us for being different. And so that's the source of your actual animosity. That is the actual source of where the pushback is coming from. It's not from your inclusion in the culture. We welcome you in the culture. We are glad you're here. Come on in, the water's fine. Where you're getting the pushback is in you coming in and saying, no, that has to go because I don't like that. But someone else here already does like that. Someone who's already here likes that. They like it the way it is. So leave that alone. There's nothing that says you've got to like everything that's in the room to be in the room. I mean, I understand the aversion to certain things that you see. Again, that Nightwing comic disturbed me and upset me. But again, I would never take it upon myself to say that the artist who envisioned that is either a bad person for making something that upset me or has the responsibility to change what's in that issue so that it no longer upsets me. And that's the pushback, because that's what is coming from this neo-rad feminist presence that has started to grow within the comic community. Is this hostility towards things that are already there, that are already established. If you're going to do that, you're now the bully, and there's the door. If you're not going to bully people and you want to enjoy geek culture, you're absolutely welcome. But then that's the problem, isn't it? What we saw in Calgary this past weekend is precisely that. The Honey Badgers did nothing wrong. The Honey Badgers, Allison Teeman, let's stop saying the Honey Badgers, because it was really about Allison and what she said. That's what they said anyway. So Allison Teeman was very respectful. She was inclusive. She was polite. She was passionate. I thought she was persuasive. But that's not acceptable, right? It's not acceptable to be the weirdo in the eyes of the neo-rad feminists that decided the honey badgers had to go. And that makes them no different at all than the jocks who bullied us when we were just kids in high school. The jocks who are currently bullying a lot of us who are kids in high school, right? Basically what the neo-rad feminists did to the honey badgers this weekend was taking them, pulling their gym shorts up, hanging them on a hook in the locker room to kick and scream while they watched their comic book burn in the trash can. That is exactly what happened to them this weekend. And you did that, and you dare call yourself part of comic culture. Anyone who would do that, I say, is not part of comic culture. And it's not that you're not welcome in comic culture. It's you're not part of comic culture. You're a bully. You're one of those people that we came here to get away from. Come on, man. What the hell? If you're going to bully people, there's the fucking door. Don't let it hit you in the ass on the way out.